Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yaakov speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 15th day of the month of Kislev, 5781. It's December 1st, 2020. It's Giving Tuesday. Big thing. After Cyber Monday and Black Thursday, or Black Friday, I guess I should say Thursday was Thanksgiving. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, then we have Giving Tuesday. Apparently on Giving Tuesday, people give to causes that they identify with, that they feel are important. The Temple Institute is one such cause, as we occupy ourselves with educating the world about the beauty of the Holy Temple, the need for the Holy Temple, its place in bringing the nations of the world together in peace. And at the same time, the Temple Institute promotes Jewish presence on the Temple Mount, Jewish prayer in the Temple Mount, Israeli sovereignty being expressed on the Temple Mount, and transforming the Temple Mount into a place that is often portrayed as a hotspot of violence and conflict into a place of peace. As the prophet Haggai spoke in God's name, I shall establish peace in this place. This is the raison d'etre. This is the reason for the Temple Institute. These causes which go way back in our history. And in fact, just last week's parsha, last week's Torah reading was when Yaakov had his dream and said, this is a house of God. And he promised that in the future he would establish a house of God on this spot. That's how long this concept of a house of God that would in turn become a vehicle through which all the nations of the world would be blessed. So, if you still are undecided about who you might want to make a Giving Tuesday donation to, you're welcome to make a donation to the Temple Institute. You just go to our website, templeinstitute.org, and it's easy as that. We greatly appreciate every bit of support, and it is your support which keeps us going. Your support in every way. This week, we read Vayishlach, this week's parsha, this week's Torah reading, which begins in Genesis 32, verse 4, concludes 36, verse 43, Vayishlach, and Yaakov sent. We're going to be talking about Vayishlach. Of course, next Thursday evening, is the first light of Hanukkah. The 25th of Kislev. It's the first night of the 8-day festival of lights, Chag Urim, it's called sometimes in Hebrew, Hanukkah. We'll have some things to say about that today, and of course much more next week's show, which will be just before the beginning of Hanukkah. And again, we're in that month of Kislev, the month of Hanukkah, which this festival of lights, of course, comes in the darkest month of the year, because the days are the shortest. And in fact, December 22nd is the winter solstice, meaning it's the shortest day of the year, the shortest hours of light during the day. And then, of course, the days start to grow longer. And the festival of Hanukkah, above and beyond its historical significance and the victory of the Maccabees, otherwise known as the Hashmonaim, against the Greek oppressors, occupiers, and attempters at erasing Torah from the world. They failed on all those counts, ultimately. Apart from recognizing and celebrating that victory and the re-liberation of the Holy Temple and its purification and the renewal of the avodat tamid, of the daily offerings and the daily service in the Holy Temple, as well as the miracle of the one single cruse of pure oil that still had the seal of the Kohen, of the priest on it, when they found it, when rummaging through the ransacked Holy Temple, which had been pilfered, much of the vessels had been stolen, including, of course, the menorah, and idols were placed inside the Holy Temple by the Greeks, and it was a big mess. So it took 8 days, as we learned in Rabbi Abba Horovitz's teaching this week, in his Positivity and the Holy Temple teaching, which you can see on YouTube or on our website. He talks about the 8 days that it took for the Kohanim, the Hashmonean priests, who were also the warriors who led this uprising against the Greeks. It took them 8 days to actually purify and reconstruct on a very simple level the temple vessels that are needed for renewing the offering and the daily service. Now, the third level of Hanukkah that we celebrate and love to talk about is the spiritual message of Hanukkah, which, on a very basic level, of course, is the message of freedom. Freedom of religion, freedom of our culture, freedom to have access to our holy spot and to our holy temple. Of course, it represents for many people in the world religious freedom, that every faith it has followers that deserve to be able to worship their religion freely. And any power, any temporal, secular power or even religious power that tries to take that away, should be denied that attempt. But there's also another more deeply spiritual level, talking about these lights, these actual 36 lights that we kindle throughout Hanukkah, starting with one light on the first night and proceeding to two on each, adding one each night, proceeding to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And the shamash, which is the candle used to light the others, and we actually light 36 candles throughout the 8 days of Hanukkah, and our sages teach us that represents the 36 hours that the supernal light lit up creation, from the day that, from the time of that Adam was created to when he sinned and dimmed those lights, and those lights became known as the organus, the hidden lights, that will be revealed at the end of days when creation is rectified and things have been straightened out. In the meantime, those are hidden lights, organus. And it says that God hid the lights to save for the final act of creation, when the righteous will be on top, and they will handle those lights responsibly, rather than risk lights being abused by evildoers in the world. So those lights are hidden away till the final days, till the final act of creation. And in the meantime, every Hanukkah, when we light our Hanukkah lights, we are revealing through them this hidden light. So it brings a purity into the world. It brings pure light into the world, pure good, pure God into the world. It's a vehicle, a humble vehicle. And when we say we light our Chanukiot, that's what we call oftentimes it's called in English a menorah. But a menorah refers to the 7 branched candelabra and only to that in the Holy Temple. A Chanukah refers to an 8-branched candelabra because we're lighting for 8 days. It's not a menorah. It's an 8-candle candelabra, and therefore we refer to it as a Chanukah. And we light our Chanukiot in our windows, and many people light them outside our front door, especially here in Israel, because the mitzvah, the actual commandment of lighting the Hanukkah lights throughout the 8 days is persumanes. We are advertising the miracle of the lights, the miracle of the pure olive oil that was enough for a single day of kindling the lights on the temple menorah, but which actually lasted for 8 days, allowing the Hashmonaim to produce new pure oil, and of course, as we mentioned before, in the meantime, to purify the actual temple and to quickly rebuild the vessels that had been destroyed, the menorah being one of them. And they built a very simple menorah, not the golden menorah, but a simple menorah, which in a time when time's pressing and you don't have an opportunity to build a full-fledged golden menorah, a much more simple metal menorah could be substituted, and that's what they did. So we are celebrating that miracle, and we are celebrating it out loud, and we are celebrating it with the world. And so we put our Chanukah outside our doors and our windows, facing the street where people can see. Here in Israel, it's very, very beautiful because almost everybody lights a Chanukah and places it in their window or by their door, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful sight to walk outside and see this amazing celebration and advertising and making public this miracle. And again, the miracle on all its levels, including the outpouring of light into the world, and boy, we need that. Maybe more than ever in our world today. So let's look forward to lots of good, pure light making its way and helping to shape the future, the year 2021, which will be being ushered in soon after Hanukkah. So a better year, a healthier year, more peaceful year, and a year where maybe we can all get together and agree on some good, positive things that need to be done in this world. Vayishlach, this week's Torah reading, and again it begins chapter 32, verse 4. Then Yaakov sent angels ahead of him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. He charged them, saying, Thus shall you say to my lord, to Esau, So said your servant Yaakov, I have sojourned with Lavan, and have lingered until now. I have acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants, and maidservants, and I am sending to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes. The angels returned to Yaakov, saying, We came to your brother, to Esau. Moreover, he is heading toward you, and 400 men are with him. Okay, I'm just going to read that first verse again. I love to read it in Hebrew. Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esau achiv aratza seir sudei Edom. Then Yaakov sent angels ahead of him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. You know, angels. The word for angel in Hebrew is malach. It happens that the word malach also means messenger, which makes sense. An angel is a messenger sent by God, as it were, to fulfill a certain mission. And in fact, the angels are tasked with a single mission, And when they complete their mission, they cease to be angels. They cease to exist. So an angel is a malach. Now, malach, as I said, also means a messenger of flesh and blood. So oftentimes the words seem to be used interchangeably, and sometimes when we know that what's being referred to is a malach, is an angel, he's referred to in Torah as an ish. We're going to come up to that in a minute. For example, the 3 men who visited Avraham at his tent to tell him that his wife Sarah was going to have a son the following year. They were described as men. We understand that they were angels, but they're described in the Torah as men. Now, at the conclusion of last week's Torah reading, which, again, the final verses of chapter 32 in Genesis, it says, and Lavan awoke early in the morning. He kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. And Lavan went and returned to his place. Yaakov went on his way, and angels of God encountered him. Yaakov said, when he saw them, this is a godly camp. So he called the name of that place Machanayim, which means encampments. And again, here the word Malachi Elohim, angels of God. Now, they're obviously angels. He was greeted by angels. Now, the interpretation that I'm reading here, the translation, I should say, refers to these men being sent as angels. I don't know if it's always consistently translated that way. I'm just going to look at another translation very carefully. Yeah. Angels. So whether we want to understand this as flesh and blood messengers or angels, they went and returned to Yaakov. Now Yaakov he's just finally, after 20 years, wrested himself from the grip of Lavan, his father-in-law, who he had a very strained relationship with, beginning with when Lavan switched Leah for Rachel. That was something I can imagine a son-in-law not ever getting over in terms of his relationship with his father-in-law. But we know at the end of last week's, toward the end of last week's reading, after Yaakov's 11 sons and daughter Dinah are born, there's a whole struggle over the flocks, and there's the accusation. Lavan becomes very suspicious and very paranoid, and he goes after Yaakov. So Yaakov has just fled from this overbearing father-in-law and from their very dangerous encounter in Gilad on his way back into the land. And of course, he went back into the land because God spoke to him in a dream, one of these dreams that take place in our readings throughout this month of dreams, the month of Kislev. And he's now back in Israel, but he's jumped out of the pot and into the frying pan. How do you say it? He's got to face Esau. This is the reason he fled 20 years earlier. So he finally, God told him to go back, that everything's going to be good. So he's back, but he nevertheless is quite concerned. So he starts to prepare himself and his children and his families and his people and all his possessions, as it were, for encountering Esau. So he sends these messengers, angels, and they come back, and Esau's heading in his direction with 400 men. So the assumption is that Esau has gotten intelligence of Yaakov's return, and he's coming to meet Yaakov. So Yaakov is now very nervous because he didn't leave Esau on good terms. The last thing Esau said was that as soon as their father Yitzhak dies, then he would kill his brother Yaakov. Now we're going to learn a little bit later in our reading that Yitzhak, Isaac, is still alive, because later on he will die. We'll be told that he dies, and that Esau and Yaakov bury him at Machpelah in the cave in Hebron, where Avraham and Sarah were previously buried. But in the meantime, Yaakov's quite concerned, and he should be. So he divides up his people into different encampments, and he says if Esau attacks one encampment, then the other will be able to to flee. He basically sees this as existential threat to him, to his family, to his nation, because he is the beginning of this nation of Israel. And he sees this existential threat, so he wants to be prepared in every which way. And he also prays to God. He actually says, making again a reference to God's promise before he left Israel, the land of Canaan, 20 years earlier. He says, I'm looking in verse 10, then Yaakov said, God of my father Avram and God of my father Yitzchak, Hashem, who said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. I have been diminished by all the kindness, meaning, who am I, God, that you've been so kind to me? Show me such chesed, kindness, and by all the truth that you have done. Your servant, who am I? With my staff, I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become two camps. When I left 20 years earlier, I had a walking stick, and now I'm coming back with two camps full of my people, two encampments. Rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother. That's such a sad prayer, sad request when you think about it. Hatzileni na miad achi, miad Esau. To rescue me, it's my brother. That we're asking God to be rescued from our brother is such a mournful plea, a heartfelt plea. Our brother, we should want to be embraced by our brother, and here he's praying to be rescued from his brother, from the hand of his brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him lest he come and strike me down, mother and children. And you had said, I will surely do good with you, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, which is too numerous to count. So, Yaakov is, we're reminding God of God's promise. It's very interesting. He doesn't want God to possibly forget that he promised that everything's going to be okay. And now, is Yaakov simply reminding himself not to fear? Because God promised? That may be the answer to our question as well. His prayer to God may simply be Yaakov reminding himself, reassuring himself that it's going to be okay because God said it was going to be okay. Anyway, he has prepared for war, as it were, because he's divided his encampment so that if Esau should strike one group of his people, the other group can flee, and there'll be refugees, but they'll have survived to carry on. And he also, as we read, he prepares gifts for Esau of many flocks and herds and animals. He lists them all, and he's setting them up ahead of his encampments in order to present to his brother, in order to appease his brother. So there is that appeasement, and then there is the prayer, of course. And Rashi points this out. Rashi, the great commentator, points this out, that these are three different approaches that can be taken in a crisis like this, and can be taken simultaneously. You should be prepared for war. You prepare for the worst. You don't rely on a miracle. You try to reach out and come to some kind of agreement. That was via the gifts that he wanted to present. And of course, you always pray to God and rely on God. But we don't rely on a miracle. We have to ourselves always be ready to act. So he does all this. And of course, when he finally meets Esau, there's this beautifully described reconciliation between the two. It seems that all is forgotten. They hug and they kiss and they cry. And of course, in the Hebrew, over the words for hugging and kissing, there are dots in the Hebrew text in a Sefer Torah, in a Torah scroll. And these are there, and intentionally. And they suggest something deeper that needs to be understood in what's being written below these dots, which are the words, and they hugged and they kissed. And there's a midrashic understanding that Esau, he hugged Yaakov, and he actually, to put it poetically, he tried to bite his neck in order to overcome him. He tried to bite his neck, and I say put it poetically because it says then that Yaakov's neck turned into ivory, and Esau broke his teeth. And what was he actually trying to do? The neck represents, because it's referred to as such, as a metaphor as such in the Song of Songs, it represents the Holy Temple. And Esau was bent on nipping all that in the bud, but he failed because God protected Yaakov and protected the future of Israel. And Esau cried then because he broke his teeth. So this is another interpretation, that their reconciliation wasn't so beautiful and heartfelt and pure as portrayed literally in the Torah itself, but there might have been a subtext. And we can read it with the subtext or not. We can read either that Esau wholeheartedly was over it and wholeheartedly embraced his brother, or that he still had some misgivings, and this might have been some kind of a ploy. It was phony. It wasn't real. His embracing of his brother. So, and of course, historically, Israel and Edom, Esau, which then became a metaphor in later history for Rome. They wasn't total reconciliation. There was a future, and that's one of the reasons why these interpretations are brought into these verses, because historically Esau, Edom, became associated with Rome, and of course Rome cruelly oppressed Israel. No love lost between Rome and Israel, and in fact the exile that we have only now begun to emerge out of, the fourth exile, is the exile of Edom, the exile of Rome. So that's why there's this subtext of continued animosity that we read into these verses. But the verses themselves just refer to a very heartfelt reconciliation. But before all this, of course, we have the incident, the amazing story of the struggle, the midnight wrestling match between Yaakov and this man. So after Yaakov, he's still preparing for Esau, to meet Esau. I jumped ahead before, but he's still preparing to meet Esau. He's still preparing to meet Esau, and he crosses the Jordan, the Jabbok River, which is a tributary of the Jordan, the Yabok, and he crosses it with his family, with all his children, his wives, and all his possessions, and then he goes back. Very mysteriously. This was right after. Then he goes back. It says, I'm reading from 32 verse 23. But he got up that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Yabok. And when he took them and had crossed over the stream, he sent over his possessions. That's what we just said. And Yaakov was left alone. Right? He went back, apparently, he crossed back over the Yabok, and he was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he perceived that he could not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So Yaakov's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for dawn is broken. And he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said, what is your name? He replied, Yaakov. And he said, no longer will it be said that your name is Yaakov, but Israel, Yisrael, for you have striven with the divine, and with man have overcome. Again, in Hebrew, that one very important verse. Vayomer elav ma shmecha, vayomer Yaakov, vayomer lo Yaakov, ye'amer od shimcha. You won't be called Yaakov anymore. Ki im Yisrael, ki sarita im Elohim, ve'im anashim vatucha. Because you have wrestled, you have struggled with man and with God, and have overcome. I should say you struggled with God and with man and have overcome. And then Yaakov inquired and said, divulge, if you please, your name. And he said, why do you inquire my name? And he blessed him there. So Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen divine place to place, yet my life, I've seen a divine face to face, yet my life was spared. The sun rose for him, and he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore the children of Israel are not to eat the displaced sinew on the hip socket to this day, as he struck Yaakov's hip socket on the displaced sinew. So Yaakov has this encounter with this Ish. He's called an Ish here, even though we understand he's a Malach, he's an angel. Who does this Ish come from now? One tradition is that he was the angel of Esau, and Yaakov, as he was preparing for Esau, that he had to wrestle with on the highest level with Esau, and that he overcame, right? He overcame this guardian angel of Esau, which may explain why, when they met the next day, Esau was very happy to hug and kiss his brother. Maybe Esau also understood that he could not overcome Yaakov. But it's such a fascinating struggle here, conflict here. And why did Yaakov go back? And they say he went back for pachim ktanim. That's what some of our sages say, that he went back because he left certain things there. And again, this is something that's also related to Hanukkah. Some say he actually went back and he had a cruse of pure oil, which he buried there, knowing that someday it would be needed when the Maccabees reliberated the temple and needed to rekindle the menorah. We can talk more about that next week. But he has this struggle with this man, with this angel, and he prevails. And he's given the name Yisrael because he has striven. He wrestles with God and he wrestles with man, and he has prevailed. And this basically is a synopsis of I believe, the Torah's understanding of the man-God relationship. And that's what I think the entire book of Genesis and the entire Torah really is telling us, that we have an ongoing, constant dialogue with Hashem, and we have some agency in Hashem's world. We amount to something. We mean something. Our actions mean something. And so when Avraham went to perform the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, went to offer up his son because God told him to, there was a struggle there. There was energy being exchanged between Avraham and God, and it ended up being there that they came together and agreed, and Yitzchak's life was spared, and a ram was put in his stead, and that would be the place of the Holy Temple. So naming Yaakov, renaming him as Israel, which would be the name of the future nation that would come from his loins, we have a dynamic. Mankind has a dynamic. Israel has a dynamic with God. We have a dance, a choreography, and it's ongoing, and it's alive, and we have an effect on God's presence in our world, how we welcome it, how we don't welcome it. You know, whether we embrace God with open arms and let his light, this organuz, this beautiful hidden light, flood our world, or whether we are going to look the other way. But we're not simply passive creatures in God's creation. We were created by God in order to bring that light into the world. And that is a message that Yaakov received on this day that he was named Israel. It's a message of the Holy Temple, and it's a message that's more important today than ever. Thank you so much for being with me, Temple Talk.